Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a beautiful young princess named Snow White. She was known throughout the kingdom for her extraordinary beauty, with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. But Snow White's beauty was matched only by her kindness and gentle nature, which endeared her to all who knew her. Snow White's mother, the Queen, had died shortly after giving birth to her, and her father, the King, was devastated by the loss. He loved Snow White deeply and vowed to protect and care for her always. However, as the years passed, the king grew lonely, and his heart began to yearn for the companionship of a new queen. After searching far and wide, the king finally found a woman he believed could fill the void in his heart. She was a beautiful woman with a charming smile and a graceful demeanor, and the king was quickly smitten. He married her, hoping that she would bring happiness back to the palace and provide Snow White with a motherly figure. At first, all seemed well. The new queen, whose name was Ravenna, appeared to be kind and caring towards Snow White. She played the role of a loving stepmother, and the kingdom rejoiced, thinking that happiness had returned to the royal family. But beneath her charming facade, Ravenna harbored a dark secret. Ravenna was a sorceress, skilled in the dark arts of magic. She was obsessed with her own beauty and sought to maintain it at all costs. She would spend hours in front of her magical mirror, which had the power to answer any question truthfully. She would ask it every day, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror would reply, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." For years, Ravenna's beauty remained unrivaled, and she was content. But as Snow White grew older, her beauty began to blossom, and she became even more radiant than her stepmother. When Snow White reached the age of 16, she surpassed Ravenna in beauty, and the mirror's response changed. One day, as Ravenna stood before her mirror, she asked the dreaded question, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" To her shock and anger, the mirror replied, "Snow White, my queen, is the fairest of them all." Ravenna's heart was consumed by jealousy and rage. She could not bear the thought of Snow White surpassing her in beauty. Her obsession with her own appearance had driven her to madness, and she was willing to do anything to regain her status as the fairest in the land. Late one night, when the moon was high in the sky, Ravenna summoned her dark magic and cast a wicked spell on Snow White. She called upon the powers of the darkest forest in the kingdom, a place where no one dared to venture, and summoned a creature of pure evil to carry out her sinister plan. As Snow White slept peacefully in her bed, a shadowy figure entered her room. It was a huntsman, a man who had been enchanted and controlled by Ravenna's dark magic. The huntsman drew his dagger and approached Snow White, but as he looked upon her innocent face, he could not bring himself to harm her. Tears welled up in the huntsman's eyes as he realized the evil he had been forced to do. Instead of taking Snow White's life, he whispered to her, "Run, Snow White, run. The queen wants you dead." With those words, he helped her escape through a secret passage that led deep into the enchanted forest. Snow White fled into the dark and foreboding woods, her heart filled with fear and uncertainty. She had never been outside the safety of the castle walls, and now she was alone in a strange and dangerous place. As she wandered deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around her, and eerie sounds filled the air. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Ravenna's fury knew no bounds when she discovered that Snow White had escaped. She interrogated the huntsman, who confessed to his act of mercy. Enraged, Ravenna used her magic to punish the huntsman, banishing him to a distant land where he would never return. Ravenna then set out to find Snow White herself, determined to finish what she had started. She disguised herself as an old beggar woman and ventured into the forest, hoping to trick Snow White into revealing her whereabouts. Along the way, she encountered a group of woodland creatures who sensed her wickedness and refused to help her. Snow White, now lost and exhausted, stumbled upon a small cottage deep within the forest. The cottage was quaint and charming, with a thatched roof and a garden filled with colorful flowers. It appeared to be the home of 7 dwarfs, whose names were Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. Unbeknownst to Snow White, the 7 dwarfs were not at home. They were out working in the nearby diamond mines. She decided to enter the cottage, hoping to find shelter and rest. Inside, she found 7 small beds and a cozy fireplace. Snow White was so tired that she fell asleep on one of the beds, completely unaware that the cottage belonged to the dwarfs. When the dwarfs returned home that evening, they were surprised to find their unexpected guest. They were even more surprised when they saw Snow White, the fairest maiden they had ever seen. At first, they were wary, but as Snow White woke and explained her plight, they realized she was in need of help and protection. The dwarfs agreed to let Snow White stay with them, and they all grew fond of her gentle nature and kind spirit. Snow White, in turn, was grateful for their hospitality and offered to help with the household chores. She became like a mother to the dwarfs, cooking, cleaning, and tending to their needs. Meanwhile, Ravenna's relentless search for Snow White continued. She used her dark magic to track the princess's whereabouts, and it wasn't long before she discovered the cottage in the forest. Ravenna knew that Snow White was within her grasp, and she hatched a plan to finally eliminate her rival. One day, while the dwarfs were away at the mines, Ravenna disguised herself as an old peddler woman selling beautiful, enchanted objects. She approached the cottage and knocked on the door. Snow White, who had been warned by the dwarfs to never open the door to strangers, hesitated. But the old woman seemed harmless, and her wares were so enticing that Snow White eventually opened the door. Ravenna offered Snow White a beautiful red apple, the likes of which the princess had never seen. The apple was so red and shiny that it seemed almost magical. Ravenna told Snow White that it was a special gift, one that would make her even more beautiful. Snow White was tempted by the offer and took a bite of the apple. Instantly, she fell into a deep and enchanted sleep, for the apple was poisoned with a curse by Ravenna's dark magic. The evil queen laughed triumphantly and left the cottage, believing that she had finally rid herself of her beautiful rival. When the dwarfs returned home that evening, they were devastated to find Snow White lying motionless on her bed, her skin as pale as snow. They could not wake her from her slumber, no matter how hard they tried. Desperate and heartbroken, the dwarfs placed her in a glass coffin and mourned her untimely fate. Word of Snow White's plight soon spread throughout the kingdom, and people came from far and wide to see the sleeping princess. They marveled at her beauty, even in death, and left offerings of flowers and gifts. The dwarfs remained by her side, guarding her day and night, hoping for a miracle. As the years passed, Snow White remained in her enchanted slumber, untouched by the passage of time. The forest around the cottage grew thicker and more mysterious, and the cottage itself became hidden from view. It seemed as though Snow White would never awaken. But fate had other plans. One day, a young prince from a neighboring kingdom heard the tale of the Sleeping Beauty and decided to embark on a quest to find her. He was determined to see the legendary princess for himself and, if possible, break the curse that bound her. With a loyal group of knights and trusted advisors, the prince journeyed through the treacherous forest, facing many trials and challenges along the way. Finally, after months of searching, they stumbled upon the hidden cottage of the 7 dwarfs. The dwarfs, initially suspicious of the strangers, soon realized that the prince's intentions were pure. They welcomed him and told him the story of Snow White and the wicked queen who had cursed her. The prince was moved by the tale and asked to see Snow White. When he approached her glass coffin, he was struck by her beauty, even in her eternal slumber. He couldn't help but lean down and kiss her on the lips, hoping that true love's kiss would break the curse. As his lips touched hers, a magical light enveloped Snow White, and she began to stir. Slowly, Snow White opened her eyes, and her gaze met the prince's. She smiled, and he knew that the curse had been broken. The dwarfs cheered with joy, and the entire forest seemed to come alive with celebration. Snow White and the prince were soon married in a grand ceremony, and their love story became the stuff of legend throughout the kingdom. The evil Queen Ravenna, upon hearing of Snow White's revival, succumbed to her own darkness and was never seen again. Snow White and her prince ruled the kingdom with wisdom and kindness, and they lived happily ever after. The dwarfs, who had become beloved members of the royal court, enjoyed their newfound prosperity and continued to protect the enchanted forest. And so, the story of Snow White and her journey from a beautiful princess to a sleeping beauty and, finally, to a queen with a heart full of love and compassion, became a timeless tale of love, hope, and the enduring power of goodness over evil.